This podcast is made possible by our supporters on Patreon, who pledge an amount to contribute every month and in return get exclusive access to bonus content, merchandise discounts, and much more. If you'd like to join our family, please go to patreon.com/Gotham Variety and subscribe. That's Patreon/Gotham Variety.
And greetings, Joe Rubenstein here, producer and host of the Gotham Variety podcast. I want to thank you very much for your support and for joining us today. Hoping you enjoy this review of two films. First of all, Joker, directed by Todd Phillips, and then James Mangold's Ford vs. Ferrari, which was released in Europe under the title Le Mans 66. I guess Le Mans is such a huge cultural event in Europe that the producers felt that title might draw more viewers, but lots to cover, so let's dive right in with Joker, which is set in Gotham City, a kind of transfigured New York City. Bill Finger and Bob Kane, who created the Batman comic strip back in 1939, decided not to set their story in actual New York for the sake of universality. They wanted people in any city to be able to identify with it, but the film certainly evokes New York City in the early 80s, which I remember well, and was a fairly rotten period for the Big Apple in terms of crime, drugs, racial tension, corruption. So to me, there are three reasons to see Joker. First and foremost, the lead performance by Joaquin Phoenix as Arthur Fleck, the man who becomes the Joker. And this was perfect casting. Phoenix, he seems to specialize in these damaged characters who are crumbling from the inside. His supporting performance in Gladiator is a different sort of example of that. Now sometimes he goes over the top. In The Master, Paul Thomas Anderson's fictionalized take on Scientology, I thought there Phoenix kind of chewed the scenery as Freddie Quell, the sex-obsessed war veteran. I thought Anderson could have reined him in a bit, but not so in Joker. I'll discuss his performance a little later. So that's reason number one. Number two is the musical score by 37-year-old Hildur Guðnadóttir. I think I pronounced that right. She is the Icelandic composer who did the music for Chernobyl on HBO as well. And her score for Joker is inventive and an object lesson in doing just the right amount and nothing more to set mood. Lots of cello, performed by the composer herself with only the slightest use of vibrato, accompanied by low-pitched percussion. And this is a film that could easily have been ruined by the wrong score, so great job there. The music, it manages to bring some empathy to Arthur Fleck, while simultaneously hinting at ominous things to come. And the third reason to see Joker is the photography, which I would describe as attractively grimy. Lawrence Sher, the cinematographer, gives us some beautiful compositions and a consistent color scheme, industrial dark greens, rich oranges and browns, dusky blues. He actually based a large part of his color scheme on sodium vapor lights. That's a greenish-orange look that existed in streetlights back in the day before they switched over to LEDs. And we get plenty of detail in dark scenes as well. I especially enjoyed two violent sequences on the subway. But let's rewind a bit. So as the film begins, Arthur Fleck is a clown for hire and aspiring stand-up comedian suffering from an unspecified mental illness. It's beyond depression. I guess you'd call it depressive psychosis. Not sure if that's an actual diagnostic term, but he's only marginally functional with the aid of 7 different medications and lives with his mother, played by Frances Conroy, who was the mother from 6 Feet Under. And she lives in a fantasy world for the most part and calls her utterly miserable son Happy, with no apparent irony, and essentially treats him like a child. So the first hour of the film, which does drag at times, is a portrait of alienation gradually congealing into rage and then violence, which was also the scheme of the better and deeper 1976 film Taxi Driver, directed by Martin Scorsese and starring Robert De Niro as Travis Bickle. And Joker borrows a great deal from Taxi Driver, but, Taxi Driver borrowed as well. I mean, alienation is a very old theme, not just in cinema, but literature as well, dating back to at least the 19th century with Dostoevsky's short novel Notes from Underground, published in 1864 and featuring a bitter, isolated, unnamed protagonist. And that novella served as partial inspiration for Taxi Driver, and I guess by extension, Joker, which has so many parallels to the earlier film that it's a borderline remake. So let's go through a few of these parallels. First of all, Travis Bickle and Arthur Fleck are both sick, but society, as presented in both films, is almost as sick as they are. Not just superficially or socio-politically, but spiritually. It's a kind of deep-rooted cultural malaise. Another parallel, both Travis and Arthur record their thoughts in notebooks, which we are permitted to sample from time to time. In Taxi Driver, we hear De Niro's voiceover reading the entries as we see him driving the city streets. In Joker, we ourselves read bits of the entries from close-ups of the notebook. I'm not sure why Phillips didn't go with voiceover. That was very effective in Taxi Driver. And in Joker, there really isn't enough time to read all the text unless you pause the film. But more parallels, Bickle and Fleck. That sounds like some deranged law firm, but Bickle and Fleck are both ticking time bombs. Now, Joker gives us more of a rationale for why this is so. Far more background, almost too much, about Arthur's past than we get in Taxi Driver, where all we learn is that Travis Bickle is a former Marine who served in Vietnam. Whereas with Arthur, we learn of some horrific childhood abuse. That actually felt a little facile to me, a little by the numbers. I mean, sure, there often is that cause and effect, the damaged child who grows up to do his own damage, but plenty of times there isn't that direct correlation. I mean, the origins of insanity and criminality and evil, they can be mysterious, and there are many cases of criminals and evil people with siblings who grew up in the exact same, often crappy circumstances that they did and went on to lead normal lives. But additional parallels between the two films, both characters are exceptionally lonely and become obsessed with attractive young women, played by Sybil Shepherd in Taxi Driver and Zazie Beetz in Joker, viewing them not so much as independent human beings, but potential sources of salvation. Also, we see both Travis and Arthur's acquisition of a gun, or guns in Bickle's case. Travis Bickle buys an entire suitcase full of guns in one amazing scene, but this is presented as a significant step on each character's downward path. And then, each in private handle their guns in a way that's almost fetishistic. Also, each character's increasingly hostile attention is drawn by a political candidate. Travis, one day, picks up presidential candidate Charles Palantine in his cab. That's unthinkable today, and probably then as well. And Arthur may or may not be the son of mayoral candidate Thomas Wayne, father of Bruce Wayne, future Batman. But above all, both characters are isolated. They are at war with society and themselves, unable to cope or connect, and even worse, when they do seek help, they're met with pretty much total incomprehension, which drives them deeper into themselves. Arthur's social worker / psychologist means well, but is incapable of handling the severity of his illness, and even if she could, her funding from the city is cut off, so that avenue is closed. And Travis Bickle, in another great scene in Taxi Driver, tries to convey some of his dark thoughts and urges to a very amusing fellow cabbie called the Wizard, beautifully played by Peter Boyle, as always. And that scene is a sort of tragicomic study in missed signals. So no shortage of parallels between these two films, Joker and Taxi Driver. Now, another Scorsese film starring De Niro that's referenced quite a bit in Joker is 1983's The King of Comedy, an underrated film that did poorly at the box office for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the lead character, Rupert Pupkin, who, like Arthur Fleck, is an unfunny comedian. He's so obnoxious, beyond obnoxious. He's really kind of a sociopath and less interested in being a great comedian than he is in the power that accompanies fame. Like Arthur, Rupert lives with his mother. Like Arthur, he is fixated on a famous talk show host, Jerry Langford, played by Jerry Lewis, who I normally can't stand, but who is phenomenal in that film. And both Rupert and Arthur have extended fantasies about their respective talk show hosts, Jerry Langford and Murray Franklin, which are presented by the director without the normal visual cues that precede a fantasy or a dream. Both characters are belittled and brutally rejected by their respective talk show hosts, which drives each into furious action. So these are some of the parallels between Joker and the earlier two films. And this is not a criticism. I mean, culture, especially popular culture, has always been at least partially about appropriation. And, if you're going to steal from the best. And Taxi Driver is certainly one of the best films of the 70s, or really ever. It's a real spellbinder. But I wanted to give credit where credit is due. Where I think Joker falls short of its models is the screenplay. It's not that it's bad. It's not. But it isn't deep or especially nuanced either. Just one example. Early in the film, Arthur says to the psychologist, "You ask if I have negative thoughts. All I have are negative thoughts." Okay, that's a fair description of depression, but it's too direct. It's too on the nose. May have been better to show rather than tell here. Have Arthur say or do something that displays or signals the depression rather than just states it so baldly like that. I also thought that the pivotal scene showing Arthur's failed performance at the comedy club was underwritten and a missed opportunity. Rather than have him simply freeze up there, he could have maybe partially succeeded and somehow shocked or impacted even that jaded audience. I mean, the scene, it lacks force. There are also very few, if any, audience reaction shots to his dismal performance. So the scene, it's not even uncomfortable. And I think it was intended to be so, and it should have been. But the visuals speak more eloquently than the words. There are some terrific wordless sequences in this film, many of which involve dance. First, Arthur alone in his apartment with the gun, which I mentioned. Then on the way to an appearance on the Murray Franklin show, after an especially savage act of violence, Phoenix, in pretty much full Joker costume for the first time, does this kind of celebratory dance of mayhem. It's like he just scored a touchdown for the team from hell. Some of the shots are in slow motion as he descends a large outdoor staircase. The music here is Gary Glitter's Rock and Roll Part 2, which you actually hear at a lot of sports events. I don't know if that was the intention, but this is one of the moments where you start to see Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight become incorporated into Phoenix's performance as Arthur goes off his meds and sort of joyfully embraces his inner chaos and the total unshackling from any kind of conventional morality. And there's always something compelling about the happy villain, If you look back through the pantheon of movie sociopaths, most, if not all, do have this kind of cheerful, merry quality. Even in old films, think of Orson Welles in The Third Man, just incredibly witty, very charming, by far the most likable character in that film, even as he compares the people that he's killing with his diluted penicillin to black dots from the heights of a Ferris wheel. Then also from around that time, there's Richard Widmark as gangster Tommy Udo in 1947's Kiss of Death. He's more of a gutter psychopath. Udo, like the Joker, giggles as he contemplates his next atrocity, one of which shocks even today when he pushes a wheelchair-bound woman down a flight of stairs, laughing as he does so. It's tempting to say that cheerfulness, it's practically a requirement for a top-notch movie sociopath. Think of Hannibal Lecter and that kind of biting wit, no pun intended. But back to Arthur's dancing. After that celebration on the stairs, he does a nice bit of sort of Fred Astaire soft shoe as the cop who's been chasing him is beaten senseless by some thugs in a subway station. And then there's a stunning bit backstage at the Murray Franklin show as De Niro is introducing him. It's a wide shot from the rear. Arthur is center frame, a couple of technicians to his left, and he does this sort of slow undulation. It's like half ballet, half Tai Chi, to the accompaniment of Ghana de Terre's cello, as the technicians kind of half glance at him, then quickly avert their eyes like true New Yorkers encountering a crazy person. But my favorite is the final triumphant dance during the riot at the end. Here, he puts the finishing touches on the Joker's look. And this was clever, I thought, by dabbing blood on either side of his lips to complete that leering Joker grin as he dances for the masked rioters on the hood of a crashed cop car. Great stuff. So when you get a superior performance like this, all the prep work done by the actor is reflected in every facet of the presentation. You hear it in Arthur's vocal nuances, that cackle that culminates in a gag and always happens to show up at the most inappropriate times. You see it just in the way he sits in a chair, for example, as a guest on the talk show, sitting next to De Niro, just jiggling his leg like a hyperactive teenager about to misbehave in school. And misbehave he does. The expression on his face after the violent explosions, that combination of almost sexual relief with a look of childlike wonder at the mess he just made, with just a flicker of apprehension in the darting eyes at potential repercussions to follow. And Phillips does well to keep the camera on the actor's face both during and after the attack. So it's all there. It's all real. It's authentic. It's multifaceted. And, this kind of method acting, for lack of a better term, at its worst, it can be uniquely horrible and also very boring. If you look at Sandy Dennis in her performance in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is a good film, but she's just a disaster zone, just a twitchy, self-indulgent, incoherent mess. But in the hands of an artist like Phoenix or Robert De Niro, when he cared, or Daniel Day-Lewis, you do get these special presentations. You almost have to be a little out of balance psychologically to pull this kind of performance off. Now, the role has to be right. I mean, Arthur Fleck, Travis Bickle, Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York, these are extreme, high-intensity characters. And Phoenix, during filming of Joker, walked off set a number of times because he just lost it. He lost self-control and needed to compose himself to the confusion of his castmates who thought maybe they'd done something wrong. But for the performance alone, see Joker. And if you're not a superhero or a comic book person, which I'm not, I mean, I enjoyed the Dark Knight trilogy, especially the third one, and I have a healthy respect for comic book artistry, especially the Marvel stuff from the 60s. There's an incredible book called Maus, spelled in German, M-A-U-S, that depicts the Holocaust in comic book form with the Nazis as cats and the Jews as mice. It sounds crazy, but it's unbelievably compelling. I could not put it down. Highly recommend it. But if you're like me and comic book superheroes or villains are not your thing, that's actually fine in this case because Joker, it's not really a comic book movie. It's more a character study, an atmospheric character study about a man on the brink. And as I said, that transformation into total nihilism reflects a growing pervasive sickness, a spiritual malaise in the culture around him, which makes the film, superficial though it may be, relevant, I think, to our world today, where it seems, the more hyper-connected we are with our various technologies, the more isolated we are as swiping and tapping seem to replace actual human contact. I think in our culture today, there's so much unfocused anger looking for an outlet, any outlet, and it makes you wonder as we become more polarized, more rage-filled, more alienated from each other and ourselves, how many budding Arthur Flecks might be out there. Ford versus Ferrari, right after this.
You can follow us on Twitter @Gotham Variety, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. We're on Spotify as well. Check out our website at gothamvariety.com, where you can send us your comments and questions. And if you love what we're doing, we'd love a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. Reviews and ratings help keep our show on the charts, so more and more people can find us.
So just as I'm not a superhero guy, I'm not an auto racing guy either, but the photography and the editing of the racing sequences in Ford versus Ferrari, especially the 24 Hours of Le Mans, are truly excellent. Now, they are not helped by the music, which I found extremely uninspired and repetitive, but even that does not mar these racing sequences. And if this movie is still in theaters where you live, I would urge you to see it on the big screen if possible. I also liked the message of the film, which I'll get to, and some excellent supporting performances, Tracy Letts and Ray McKinnon in particular, and solid lead performances by Christian Bale and Matt Damon. Actually, Damon, in the last scene of the film, rises well above solid and is in fact superb. It's a scene where his character, Carroll Shelby, struggles manfully to master his emotions, which Damon, who's a very likable, intelligent actor always, conveys with maximum skill. So these are some of the elements that make Ford versus Ferrari an enjoyable ride. Not a work of art by any stretch, but a solid Hollywood entertainment that does not insult the intelligence and has something to say. Now, it does take too long to say it. There were 3 or 4 early scenes that could have been cut, but the characters in this film, which is a true story and takes place mostly in 1965 and 66, can be placed, roughly speaking, into 3 categories. First of all, you have the artists, idealists focused on excellence alone. Then you have the corporation executives focused almost exclusively on marketing. And then you have the middlemen in the precarious position of bridging the artists and the executives. So let's start with the artists. There are 2 in the film. Enzo Ferrari, that's a small role, and Ken Miles, that's a lead role played by Christian Bale. And these 2, they never share a scene, but they do have a nice moment of mutual acknowledgement from a distance toward the end of the film. But Enzo Ferrari, who founded the Ferrari company in 1939, is contemptuous of the assembly line mentality that is the Ford Motor Company's calling card. Ferraris are painstakingly handcrafted automotive works of art that also run beautifully at high speeds. And during this period, Ferrari dominated Le Mans pretty much every year. So that's Enzo Ferrari, played by Italian actor Remo Garrone. And then the Christian Bale character, Ken Miles, is a British race car driver of genius, a veteran of World War II, who, as the film begins, is struggling to feed his family as a mechanic in California. Actually, both Ferrari and Miles have fallen on hard times. Ferrari, in his lust for perfection and total indifference to budget, has sunk his company into bankruptcy, and Miles cannot play the game. He's not a people person, so he can't achieve success as a race car driver because he's in constant conflict with the people that he needs to please, but whom he views as his inferiors, bureaucrats at the races who hassle him about his car specifications, marketers and various sales types who want him to smile for the camera. He's very quick to anger and systematically burns every bridge. All he really cares about is, as he puts it, driving the perfect lap. So he too is facing bankruptcy. The IRS takes over his garage and he has no means of support for his wife and son. So these are your artists, Enzo Ferrari and Ken Miles. On to the executives. So the corporation is the Ford Motor Company, and its 2 representatives are, first of all, the CEO, Henry Ford II, sometimes called the Deuce, played by Tracy Letts, and he's imperious, he's vain, he's hyper-competitive, he's insensitive to his workers as human beings, so sort of like the soul of the corporation, the kind of guy that, if Bernie Sanders had his way, would be shipped off to the nearest gulag for some re-education. But worse is Leo Beebe, executive vice president in charge of marketing, whose lips are surgically attached to Ford's rear end and who harbors a jealous hatred of creative independent types, placing him in direct conflict with Christian Bale's Ken Miles, who he calls a beatnik. So these 2, Ford and Beebe, are your corporation executives. Now, the middlemen are, first of all, Matt Damon's Carroll Shelby, who actually won Le Mans in 1959 driving an Aston Martin, but was diagnosed with a heart problem shortly thereafter and never raced again. So Shelby is a former artist, now a middleman, who, as the film begins, is operating a somewhat successful car manufacturing company, Shelby American, and he's he's friends with Ken Miles, with whom he joins forces now and then on various races in California. And the other middleman is Lee Iacocca, played well by John Bernthal, who, like Beebe, works for Ford, but he's less sycophantic. He's more creative. And as the film begins, he's pushing the deuce to pull out all the stops and try to win Le Mans, to change Ford's stodgy image and appeal to the younger generation. So Ford sends Iacocca to Italy to buy the Ferrari company, with the catch that Ford will pull all the strings and that Enzo will lose his creative autonomy. That's a proposal that Enzo rejects with a string of choice Italian insults and sells to Fiat instead, who let him keep his autonomy. So Ford decides to build a supercar in-house and to get the best driver he can possibly find and beat Ferrari at Le Mans. Damon is hired as a sort of project manager and intermediary between the Ford people and the driver that he chooses for the task, Ken Miles, with whom Beebe butts heads immediately. Beebe pressures Damon to get a different driver. Damon says that in order to win Le Mans, he needs a pure racer behind the wheel, and Beebe responds, well, we think he's too pure. And that right there, that's the central conflict that drives the film. And it occurred to me as I watched this that the film could be viewed as a metaphor for movie making in Hollywood, where the conflict between artistry and marketing, creativity and the financial bottom line has been a factor like forever. I mean, every film ever made in Hollywood has these two separate and often conflicting motives, creative excellence and profit. I mean, sometimes they succeed hand in hand, and you get a great film that's also a hit, like The Godfather, but those are essentially miracles and extreme rarities. So there is this central governing concept, the purity of the artist potentially corrupted by the interference of the corporation and the marketers. Now, is this idea explored thoroughly? Not really. But it is an action movie for the most part, and whatever its flaws, it's this concept, plus some good performances, and the beautifully edited racing scenes that make it worth seeing. So the two big races in the film are the Daytona 500 in Florida, and then there's Le Mans itself, and in both races, the editor, Michael McCusker, mixes his shots beautifully. It's like watching a master boxer mix his punches. You get terrific low-angle shots, almost at road level, behind the cars, which drive up to and over speeds of 200 miles an hour. You get nice wide overhead shots with the camera moving sometimes with, sometimes against the cars. You get interior shots from the pit. And the thing with Le Mans, it's not like other races. There's no track per se. The cars drive around 8.5 miles of pretty rough, ungraded country road. And so the race, from a visual standpoint, is never dull. And since it's 24 hours, you get that contrast of brilliant daylight shots with rainy shots in the dead of night. So the editing and the photography are top-notch. And again, this is coming from someone with only the most basic knowledge of race car driving. And pretty much the highest compliment I can give these scenes is they made me want to learn more about race car driving, about the drivers themselves, about the cars. They made me want to see some live races on TV. So to me, that's high praise indeed. The flaws of the film, at 2.5 hours, it's probably 20 minutes too long, and the phoned-in musical score were not nearly bad enough that I was ever tempted to turn it off. And I'm pretty quick on the trigger, but I'm glad I saw it. And the climax of the film, which I will not reveal, it's both unexpected and interesting, and it revolves around a decision made by the Christian Bale character, Ken Miles, that the viewer doesn't quite know how to feel about. At least I didn't, and I think that was the filmmaker's intention. So keep an eye out for Damon's final scene. Also, a very good confrontation between Damon and Letts in the Ford offices in Detroit. It's tense, it's well staged, where Damon stands up to the deuce, and Christian Bale as the uncompromising Ken Miles is also very good. Not my favorite actor. There's something kind of cold about him, but it's a very well thought out, honest performance. He adopts a working class British accent, a steely jaw, bulldog stare. doesn't so much walk toward people as stalk toward them. And if you close your eyes and you think of how Bale presented himself as the mega-rich Bruce Wayne in The Dark Knight, and then you look at him here, you realize the degree to which the actor is capable of transforming himself. It's pretty impressive. And last but not least, the costume and set designers capture mid-60s California pretty much flawlessly. They don't hit you over the head with period details like they did in Mad Men, which I appreciate, but everything looks correct, from the clothes to the hairstyles to the accessories to the signs to the interiors, all of it just very well done. Final thoughts right after this.
Your feedback is important to us. On Twitter, @Gotham Variety, on our Facebook page, or you can email the program, joe@gothamvariety.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us, we love engaging with you. And if you'd like to join our family and get exclusive access to bonus content, please go to patreon.com/GothamVariety and subscribe.
So both of these films did huge numbers at the box office, especially Joker, grossing over $1 billion worldwide. But Ford vs. Ferrari was no slouch, generating nearly $250 million. I mean, obviously, Joker, as part of a hugely successful, famous franchise dating back 80 years, had a leg up, but it pleases me, and I think it's a hopeful sign, that two commercial Hollywood products are this watchable. Neither approaches a level of masterpiece. They're too superficial for that. But on the other hand, they're not entirely superficial either. And even if neither qualifies as art, both possess artfulness to burn, which is the next best thing. And again, I'm heartened by evidence in at least these two films, and a few others recently, that ideas and creative excellence can still coexist on some level with the money machine. And, here's hoping that there's more where that came from. I think Hollywood could use a creative renaissance. As always, I welcome your feedback, so if you have any questions or comments on this review or anything else, please contact me via email, joe@gothamvariety.com. I would love to hear your thoughts. Check us out and subscribe on Apple, Stitcher, or Spotify so you don't miss a single episode. Next week, we'll have an interview with Jonathan Eig, who wrote a fantastic biography of the greatest, Muhammad Ali. That should be a lot of fun. But until then, thanks so much for joining us. Take care, and we'll see you soon.